Over the Easter break, I continued my annual 99 county meetings, and as always, Iowans set the agenda. At my open town meetings, I had big turnouts. People shared strong views about tariffs, deportations, and the Department of Government efficiency. At nearly every one of those Q&As, Iowans also raised concerns about the federal deficit and the $36 trillion debt hanging over our heads. I'm sharing this feedback with my constituents, my colleagues here, because that's what representative government is all about. And it seems like no matter which issues put a burr under their saddle, my constituents are hungry for the same thing. So simply, they'd like to have some certainty of policy coming out of Congress, some predictability. Such predictability is very essential for our country to move forward economically. Some people see Washington in chaos. These feelings of uncertainty keep Americans up at night. Workers are worried about their retirement savings when they watch the stock market seesaw. Farmers are wondering if they'll have a market to export their grain. Small businesses are worried that rising import costs will drive them into the red or force them to jack up prices on their customers. And everybody's concerned that come January 1st, 2026, they could be subject to the largest tax hike in U.S. history, and that's without even a vote of Congress. I've long been an open book regarding my concerns about tariffs. I consider myself what around this town we call free and fair traders, negotiating tariffs down. That said, the president has another approach. President Trump has raised valid concerns about some of our existing trading relationships, especially with China. That's why I'm willing to take a wait-and-see approach as Trump's trading partners come to the negotiating table. I hope his policies will ultimately result in free and fair trade. If they do, he will be much more successful than my approach over the last 50 years. So if he is successful, I'll be the first one to say praise the Lord. But in the meantime, it's clear the on-again, off-again tariffs are driving uncertainty. And that uncertainty is the same that's reverberating across our economy. There's no better example than when the market for U.S. Treasuries went haywire at the beginning of April as a result of some of this tariff talk. Foreign investors got skittish and actually dumped U.S. Treasuries. That caused interest rates to spike on the 10 and 30-year bonds. And that should have set off the alarm bells here in Congress. American taxpayers are on the hook for a $36 trillion national debt. Americans are already paying $1 trillion a year in interest payments, about 3 times what they were before interest rates and inflation hit us after the last 4 years. And this $1 trillion is more than we spend annually on national defense. And in the end, we don't have anything to show for all that interest. Don't forget, those costs rise when interest rates rise. If we pay more servicing on our debt, there's less money for everything else that the federal government does to help the American people. Given the size of our national debt, even slightly higher than expected interest rates means trillions more spent servicing our debt over the next decade. Now, worse yet, if our bondholders were to lose confidence in our ability to budget or govern responsibly, soaring debt payments could trigger a return of sky-high inflation or even end America in a fiscal crisis. In 2023, the credit rating agency Fitch downgraded the U.S. credit rating, noting the size of our national debt and the erosion of government. And those words, the erosions of governance, are from the Fitch report. More than ever, Congress must step up its game to provide stability in the form of good governance and fiscal restraint. This means we must work to deliver on essential congressional functions without the last-minute brinkmanship that has become a norm when either we don't appropriate for next year and government should shut down, or, like I'm going to talk about, the national debt and the debt ceiling coming, and if we don't handle that issue, we can possibly shut down the government. Now, along the lines of what I'm talking about, I'd like to delineate 3 must-do items on our agenda that needs to be completed before October 1st of this year. First, we must pass a tax and spending package to avert massive tax hikes on the American people. That must include resources for the administration to secure our borders and beef up our depleted military. Second, we must guarantee we will always pay our debts. This means we must raise the debt ceiling well in advance of the Treasury running out of money to pay the bills. Currently, we're expected to hit the debt ceiling midsummer to early fall. So, common sense tells me we should avoid the chaos in the bond market, which could cause our debt payments to skyrocket. We must lift the debt ceiling with plenty of room to spare. Why wait to the midnight hour of government shutting down? That's too often the practice around here in the United States Senate. Finally, we must fund the government to avoid the threat of that government shutdown. Our rinse and repeat shutdown stare downs have become an unnecessary recurring source of heartburn for our constituents and delivers unnecessary uncertainty for the economy. We can surely do better. Completing our must-do list on time and drama-free begins with passing the tax and spending package in timely and fiscal responsible fashion. I know what it takes to grease the wheels and enact historic tax cuts using budget reconciliation process. It's a 4-letter acronym, KISS, K-I-S-S. In other words, keep it simple, senators. The 2017 Trump tax reform was a historic achievement. We cut taxes across the board. We did so by simplifying the tax code and trimming back the special deductions and credit. As a result, most taxpayers pay less tax simply by claiming the increased standard deduction that was in that 2017 law. They're able then to avoid the headache of spending hours sifting through receipts and IRS forms. We now have the chance to make these tax cuts and reforms permanent. This alone would take the weight of a $4 trillion tax hike off the chest of the economy. That would provide much needed certainty to families and businesses. So we must keep our eye on the ball. Let's avoid the laundry list of costly new items that we can't afford, at the same time complicating the tax code, and at the same time risk causing progress on the reconciliation package to come to a screeching halt. We're coming off of an unprecedented peacetime spending binge, and it's time to pay the piper. The fact is, the federal government is broke. We're currently running $2 trillion annual deficits. And in just 3 years, our national debt is set to eclipse the World War II era record relative to the size of the U.S. economy. Let's get in the habit of paying for all new policies so we don't continuously keep digging ourselves into an ever larger fiscal hole. Let's stick to common sense. When you find yourself stuck in a hole, stop digging. Start climbing. This will require senators, congressmen and congresswomen, and the President Trump to set priorities and be willing to make trade-offs. Let's move forward with consensus spending reductions. Let's pull back expensive Biden-era regulations that supercharge mandatory spending programs. And at the same time, who's going to argue with the eliminating waste, fraud, and abuse? Relative to new tax and spending policies, the overall package must result in significant deficit reduction, but we can't let the good be the enemy of the perfect. We didn't get into our fiscal situation, the present situation, overnight, and we're not going to solve it in this single bill either. Polling repeatedly shows Americans hold Congress in low regard. I've said this before, but it bears repeating. At my county meetings, someone will yell at the back of the room, Grassley, referring to me, "Why can't you do something about the deficit?" We can begin to restore public's confidence in Congress by doing our jobs, getting our work done on time, and ye gods, stop digging a deeper fiscal hole. I yield, and I suggest the absence of a quorum.
The clerk will call the roll.
Ms. Alston Brooks.